Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're going to be discussing what I say is one of the top 5 UFO encounters. I talk about that quite a bit on this show, the Socorro incident, and I have some friend researchers that have been on this for I think since when I first met them, a long time, and that is Ben Moss and Tony Angiola. And the name of their book is called Not of This World, the Socorro UFO Landing with Humanoids, witness Lonnie Zamora. I know that's a long title, but you can shorten it up if you want to. When you think of this case, you actually think of Ray Stanford, or I do. He wrote such a great book called Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. Way back, he was the first researcher on site there, and it's a wonderful book. But there's Ben and Tony decided to take a fresh look today and see what they could find for evidence and new evidence and they've been to Socorro, I think 4 times. Just a few things first. I would like to talk about, I don't know if anyone saw the news where it's possible that they might find us, or they've been finding an amount of phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, of all places. And that's usually produced by bacteria. So it's possible it could be a sign of life. And it's hard to believe, 900-degree Fahrenheit planet. Hey, if life can exist there somehow, good for life, I say. I want to thank everyone who listens to the show and everyone behind the scenes. We have an active Facebook page. As a matter of fact, we're actually simulcasting over there as well. And that's actually Facebook at /podcast UFO. And check it out over there. There's postings we try to get up all the time. And our blog over at podcastufo.com is called Before They Were UFOs. And that's about flying saucers and the origin of that. That's by Charles Lear, and he does an audio blog, which I'm posting here on YouTube and in the podcast feed every week now. And it's becoming pretty popular. People really like those audio blogs. I do encourage you to read the text version, though, because there are links there. And, before I start this show with my guests tonight, I have an announcement. And as I was talking here, I saw a text just come in from James Fox. He's just been real busy today. And the reason why he's real busy is because he's announcing today that the phenomenon will be available through digitally for downloads starting on October 6th. And you can pre-order right now on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, or Vimeo, and Vudu, actually. So I'm going to run the trailer right now.
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
My gosh. Look at that thing.
We need to accept that we are not alone in the universe.
The federal government, all these years, has covered up everything. It's very, very bad for our country.
There have been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
It was not anything from this earth. All I could do is keep a mouth shut.
The public has a right to know.
There's a tremendous resistance. I guarantee every one of them knows that this event happened.
Hiding these dark secrets even from elected presidents.
They came running up here in such a panic. Child can't make that up.
Declassified government documents confirm ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
Wow. That's what I got to say about that. Wow. And here we are with Tony and Ben. Welcome to the show, guys.
How's it going, Martin?
Great. Thanks for, I bet you're excited for that movie to come out too, aren't you?
We've been waiting.
I've had so many conversations with James about it, and it's been a long time coming. I know it's been a long journey, as all of his films are, but you're always rewarded at the end with what James produces.
Yes, I know. I've said to him a few times that my favorite UFO movies are his. They really, it's such high quality. And he just texted me again. He said he can't keep up with texts and emails today. He just can't keep up with them. So, which is really great. I can't wait for that to come out. And also a lot of people, I've been trying to talk to Randy Nickerson about the aerial phenomenon, trying to coax him into doing something similar, get that out while there's a captive audience. It's all done. It's in the can. It's ready to go. But he's, he is working with distributors trying to figure out what to do with that. And it's a tough time. It's hard to figure out what to do. But we have a captive audience.
Yeah, with a movie, knowing James and having had discussions with him, it's unbelievable how many people are involved in it and how much goes into production and getting everything right and all the traveling. He was the only person, I think, to film from the Great Wall in China with drones. He was up there with the Chinese government. So the fact that he was able to tie all this together, I think, if you're a fan of James' movies, this is going to be the best yet.
Yes.
James has spent a lot of time on people's couches and just sleep forever. And
James is a digger. Yeah, he's a digger. He's like a journalist. He's like a Woodward and Bernstein of ufology.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talked to Lee Spiegel today too. He's driving right now. Otherwise, he'd be on to announce it. And he might pop on next week. But yeah, it's great. So as I mentioned in the monologue, Socorro is I think one of the top 5 UFO cases. Mostly it's mostly because of Lonnie Zamora, but because of his honesty and his forthrightness and all that. You know what I'm trying to say. Wow, I'm stumbling on words. But I think it is. There's so much because now there were other witnesses. I know that no one got the person from Colorado. They didn't get their name, and unfortunately, that would have been a key witness. But anyway, let's pretend that a listener, because I have a lot of new ones, have no idea what we're talking about when it comes to the Socorro case in 1964. So why don't you give them an overview of what happened?
Well, let me put Tony on the spot and have him do that for us.
Okay, Tony.
I'll try to keep it brief.
No, you don't have to. We have 2 hours.
I won't keep it brief.
Well, a child.
Lonnie woke up as a baby one day. So Lonnie Zamora, he was this great police officer in Socorro, New Mexico, who was on random patrol in the town when he noticed a known person of interest came by at a rapid pace who was speeding, and he knew the guy, so he goes after him. As they're leaving the small town of Socorro, he spots this bright object coming across the sky, and he doesn't know what it is. It could be a plane going down. And it was headed toward the dynamite shack just over these hills in this arroyo. He lets the speeder go. He diverts his brand new police car that he's only had for about a week onto this dirt road, which is surprising for a police officer to do that unless something is of grave importance. He starts gunning his car up this hill. He's risking damaging his car, but this is he thinks someone might be hurt, or an overturned car, or something like this. Three tries to get up this hill. He gets up there. He's about, I think it was about 150 yards away when he spots what looks like an overturned vehicle of some sort, when in fact it was this, what people describe as an egg-shaped craft. And you could see 3 of the 4 struts from his point of view. But he also saw these 2 figures in white coveralls, which looked like little people. And he would go on to describe them later as such. He got closer to this vehicle and got out of his car. And by that time, what he heard upon exiting his police car was the slamming of like a submarine type of hatch, if you will,
A tank.
or a tank.
Double hole.
Yeah, and so he gets close enough to this thing, about 25, 30 feet.
36 feet, according to Ray Stanford. Yeah.
And he could see this emblem on the side of the craft, which we'll talk about later. But this thing, this blue flame knifes into the ground, and it's not producing any smoke or anything. What you're seeing is dust, described by witnesses, because of the force of these subatomic particles, if you will. This loud roar, which was heard by many, many people. This object rises to about 25 feet or so, then goes completely silent. Lonnie says it sat there for a while.
It's egg-shaped.
Egg-shaped. And it starts moving slowly near the dynamite shack. Not over it, kind of off to the side. And it starts increasing in speed, completely silent, and going up in altitude at a rapid pace. By that time, he was radioing for help to Officer Chavez, who shows up at the last minute. He sees something. He doesn't really talk about it, keeps it quiet. This thing was going hypersonic in a short period of time, and there's nothing that we had then or today that can replicate such an event. And so Lonnie was petrified, and he told his buddy Sergeant Chavez what happened, and the rest is history. From then on, we had the Air Force showing up, and private investigators. Our friend Ray Stanford showed up on, I think it was Tuesday, on the 26th by that time. And
4 days later.
This is a case that has eyewitness testimony from a credible police officer. There's physical, tangible evidence left behind from imprints of the feet that were attached to this craft. There were many people that came up later and said what they heard. And
the bottom line is, the reason this is probably one of the best evidential cases in U.S. history is it was a case that was investigated by the FBI, the CIA, and every force with Project Blue Book involved in 1964. But the fact it was witnessed by such a credible person as Lonnie Zamora kind of brought it out to the public. And the interesting thing about the case is it hit the papers really fast. So the government actually didn't have time to clamp down on the information, because the next day it was in El Defensor Chieftain, the Socorro local newspaper, and the editor was on site snapping pictures. And so it got out really quick. So it wasn't like a Roswell type scenario where you could kind of clamp down on the data. It was out there, and there was a lot. And in the book that we wrote, there's a lot of data showing that it hit the paper so fast that they didn't have time to really come in and say, "Whoa, slow down! This was a vertical takeoff vehicle, or the Apollo lander, or that kind of thing." So it's probably a training case for the government to realize that if they don't jump on something quickly, it'll go wrong for them. And also, it was kind of like, because it was in between various military bases that are known to exist in New Mexico, White Sands, now Melgardo, and it's just a very active area. For them to be surprised by this was probably kind of a slap in the face to them, to all of a sudden be surprised by a vehicle landing in that area where, we tested the lunar module out in White Sands, and we had Trinity site where we tested the atomic bomb, and it's a very, very protected area.
One of the things
hang on just 1 second. Ben, I'm going to have to tell you, when you speak, can you pull forward a little bit, because you're a little bit weak in the mic.
Sorry.
All right. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to
Go ahead, Tony.
In terms of how it got out so fast. When we went to Socorro and we went to the archives, and anybody can do this, we found so many different newspapers archived that said the same story. And like you said, there's no way they could have caught it in time in order to mask it the way they did Roswell.
Wow. So one of the things that's kind of baffling me, you mentioned, the craft lifts up. When it lifts up, it makes the big roar and the flame and all that. And then it just sits there with no noise, no flame, and moves along. It kind of is baffling how a propulsion system would have to, shoot a flame out. I mean, you'd think it would be propulsion. I'm not sure what else it would be. to lift it up.
You hear about our crafts that go to the moon. You have those two kinds of engines. You know, you have engines for takeoff, engines for travel, engines for landing. So is it possible that this Socorro craft is not as advanced as maybe some of these other UFOs that we've seen, but still way more advanced than our own, because we still cannot replicate what was described at Socorro? But is it possible that it's the Model T version of the future? You know?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we see UFOs that are made of plasma transfiguring and changing shape and things like that. I consider those being a little bit more advanced, perhaps. Whereas the Socorro craft is still more of a nuts and bolts kind of a thing.
You know, I know we'll talk about the insignia because that was controversial, but also, did he, about the figures that stood about 4 feet tall, the two figures in white overalls, did he not tell that? Did that not get out at the time? That part of it?
No, I got out pretty quick that they were diminutive, childlike was the description. You know, Lonnie said that he looked like small figures or small children. And when Ray had showed up with Dr. Hynek on the site, they were near a greasewood bush there, which was eventually, I think, sliced in half by the blue flame. But when they were standing next to it, he had a point of reference. So when Hynek and Ray were out there, Lonnie said they were about this tall, and he held his hand about 4 feet off the ground. And it's been well documented by, you know, Ray brought it up, and I did some research. I don't know of any programs besides in Vietnam when we sent small people into the ground, into these tunnels that the Vietnam had created. I don't know of any program of pilots that uses small people to fly and would have people that are approximately 4 feet tall to operate a flying vehicle. And so that was the thing that probably freaked Lonnie out the most, was they didn't even look human.
And, you know, another interesting aspect that we discovered while we were there is that particular creosote bush that was sliced in half by the blue particle beam, so to speak, of exhaust, that particular bush is exponentially larger than anything else on that site. And we have plenty of photographs to show this. We have the original one from 1964 and from our various trips. And it's kind of like Travis Walton's tree that the UFO touched that Jennifer Stein measured.
The tree rings kept growing, facing where the UFO came in.
Right. And we're finding this possibly to be true with Socorro because of that.
Yeah, when I was recently there last April for a show that's about to come out on Travel Channel, but I'm probably not supposed to talk about it, so I won't mention who I was with, but we noticed that the creosote bush, greasewood, I get confused as to what it actually is.
Yeah.
Ray will probably get mad if I get it wrong, but it's like greasewood bush. But it was huge. It was bigger than anything out there. And I'm thinking, wow, if that is an evidence of radiation, then nothing.
How are you so sure you got the exact spot though?
Because the GPS coordinates, we locked them in a couple of years, like 2014.
Yeah, we locked them in a while ago.
And also, I went with, we went with John Larson, who's with El Defensor Chieftain. We had permission from the owner. And then when we went for the TV show this past year, we also had permission from the owner.
Well, not to mention that bush and that location is so distinct.
It's very distinct. The rocks are still there. It's kind of there's water that rolls down through that location, and there's a church that is new there, but I really don't want to give away how to get to the site, but it's almost obliterated, but we're always at the correct site. All the witnesses, the GPS coordinates right. John Larson knew where the site was. Paul Harden, and it just, the photographs that were taken in 64 match up perfectly. We even parked our car in the same spot where Lonnie parked his car back in that day. So we know we're at the right spot. It's just completely almost weathered away now, except for the ring of rocks that are around the 4 strut locations of the craft.
Now, another thing I thought was very interesting is that when they looked for footprints, they only found like round prints. Are you familiar with that?
Well, there was the ladder prints, but there were small little footprints.
I researched this heavily for the book, and I didn't want to get into it, just like I didn't want to get into the calcified sand, which there are documents that said there was calcified sand. But it just kept, the more I researched for the book and the more Tony and I did our homework, the more we realized there were just more and more documents. And it's just like with the Craigslist file that Rob Mercer had. I just couldn't put all that in the book and afford to print it. But there was a couple of things. The round circle was from possibly a ladder, which came down and then shifted once as weight came down the ladder, as Ray says in his book. And then there was kept mentioning these paw prints, and they were kind of like almost like the paw of an animal. And they were not human, they were not round, they were just weird. And the same thing was reported in another case near the same time, which may or may not be true. But it was weird because Lonnie did say there were two creatures standing next to, looking under the craft as if it was having mechanical difficulties. So they were probably wearing some type of gear that created this weird print. I've seen it as two parallel bars. I've seen it as like a paw print that a lion would make, but they were different from the two round prints of the ladder that was extended. And it's not mentioned much. And even, the FBI agent told him, you don't want to mention much about creatures because people are going to think you're nuts. It was kind of an honest way of saying, to protect yourself, don't talk too much about the two creatures you saw standing next to the vehicle. But as we know now, it's all in the book. And later in life, Lonnie started saying that, whatever they were, they weren't from here. He went from white coveralls to saying those creatures were not from here.
Yeah, I thought for him to actually say that was very brave of him to actually, he was brave all the way through. Now, there was another landing north of there within the same time frame. Is that right? Did I read that in your book?
La Madera?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, it's funny because there was so much about that case that would have to have been a whole nother investigation to go after that, because a lot of the things matched up. Ray kind of felt it was a hoax, and that kind of put us off on it, but a lot of the data was the same. But as I dug into that, there seemed to be evidence they didn't even know about Socorro when this was reported in their newspaper. I'm not sure if that's true. There's only two things that happened. This was manufactured to resemble Socorro incident, or this actually happened and was just a continuation of the same craft. But we really didn't have the time or the funds to do that story right. Would have been, you have to investigate just like we did Socorro, and ended up producing a book that took 5 years of our lives to go over.
So you think it could have been a copycat, like trying to get attention, possibly?
Sure. I'm not sure. There were other witnesses that said this thing was like 4 or 5 hours in a field. Butane, the descriptions of an egg-shaped craft, it's funny how they describe it back in the day. They say football shaped, like an upside-down bathtub, butane shaped, like a telephone pole. But they're all trying to describe a shape that's not a flying saucer. So there were multiple witnesses. The police did find evidence on the ground. They said there was a smell of kerosene, which they could have been burning trash there for years, for all I know. It's just not something we looked into. And considering how much time and effort we spent into Socorro, if I really wanted to dig in, we could dig in. But it's just too old at this point. It's hard enough investigating something from 64. It's hard enough investigating something that happened a day or two after something in 64.
Right. Now I have had up on the screen. I'll pull it back up. This, I know you can't really see, but you can see, if you can see. I know, Ben, you said you're half blind without your glasses, but
I'm good.
Yeah. All right. So you can see that insignia is not what was swapped out. And can we talk a little bit about that part alone? Because I know that Lonnie did a sketch, and then supposedly that sketch was swapped out with another one, and Lonnie was told to sign it. Is that right?
You want to chime in here?
Yeah, more or less. The Air Force was trying to say that they wanted to prevent a copycat, so they came up with this fictitious symbol that was umbrella shaped and did not truly depict the symbol that was seen by Lonnie, because Lonnie wrote it down right away on a napkin, and on top of that he had a young man, I forget his name, who was an artist who drew it with the correct symbol, who later had to erase it and change it.
That was Harold
Baca. And so if you just do a little bit of digging into the old newspapers, you see what was originally printed, which was what appears to be an upside down V with 3 bars. Either through it.
Is this it right here, Tony?
That's not it either. That's the
fake. That's the fake. Yeah.
There were several of them. There was like 3 or 4 of them, but the correct symbol is we actually have a hat.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull up I just found your symbol that you came up with, and I know people are wondering why this is a big deal, and I want to tell me if this is it when I pull it up, the one that says genuine.
Right. Yeah. Ray Stanford did all this research on the symbol, and he was very close with Lonnie too, and Ray speaks very fluent Spanish. And when Lonnie first saw this, he was describing this in Spanish over the radio, and in Spanish, tres líneas para abajo, it's kind of hard to determine if it's exactly below the inverted V or does that mean through the inverted V. So it's kind of interpretive. So
inverted V with 3 lines beneath it.
Yeah. So as you can see here, it's 3 lines kind of going through it. So if you imagine it's either that or 3 lines below it, I think Ray did a really good job putting this together, so to speak, based on the descriptions. But at the end of the day, the symbol doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? It's like it could be eat at Joe's or stay away from this area because it's really dangerous. You're going to get sliced in half like this bush we just did here.
The thing is, and I go over this extensively in the book, and the book is a labor of love. It's not for money because it cost me a fortune to print myself. But basically, Ray contributed the chapter. Most of the chapter on the symbol, and the symbol to him was the fake symbol was a contract with the government to abide by this lie, and I agree with that. And when I researched the symbol, the initial report in El Defensor Chieftain said that Lonnie wrote the symbol on a paper sack that he found in the desert. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I've never heard that anywhere, but it's right there in El Defensor Chieftain. And so the paper sack became a page from what turned out to be maybe a Boy Scout manual that Dave Rudiak, who also allowed me to reproduce in the book his analysis of the symbol, he said this is something that might be laying around the police station. So to make a long story short, it's the longest chapter in the book about the symbol, is that Captain Holder, who was on the scene, White Sands uprange commander of the base there, he was on the scene. He drew a fake symbol. His son told Ray that, and Ray has it in his books, of course, also in Pentagon Pantry, that my father obscured the symbol. And the signature of Lonnie Zamora is different from the way the symbol's written. It's 2 different handwritings. But he had to sign that as a contract to, like, it's God, country, family, that type of order of things. So even to his family, he would lie about the symbol forever because there was a contract he had with the government, and they were still thinking, I think, at this point that this was a secret project. But the fact that Holder obscured the symbol is pretty well known, and then that's the interview that's on YouTube about that. And so I believe the symbol is important simply because the inverted V with the 3 bars, and Ray agrees with me, was maybe, and it was in the center of the egg-shaped craft where the blue flame came out. It probably just means don't stand here. This is radioactive. You'll get fried when this engages because the V is pointing to the thruster. The 3 bars might signal radioactive waves of radiation or whatever. Red, it was in red. Red is the color of fire, of blood, of maybe danger. So I really think it was like a don't back up sign on a truck where you don't stand by a truck when it backs up. It basically meant there's a powerful engine here of whatever type of propulsion. And when engaged, you don't want to be anywhere near it.
Well, I know there was a lot to do about the symbol itself, and one of the reasons I think it's important is, trying to research something similar to that in any type of language or anything like that. Now, you mentioned it might be like a caution type sign, which very well could, but has anyone tried to decipher any type of language or anything like that?
We went through.
We had some friends also that were checking the periodic tables. And
yeah,
things like this.
There was what is it called? The table. What is the alchemist? There's an alchemist table that has an inverted V with 1 bar, and then we found a document that had an inverted V with 3 bars. That was a treasure map, and it's some type of Spanish symbol. But it wasn't related at all. And the way that Hynek drew it, and in the photo I have in the book that Ray had, that happened after Ray wrote his book, where Ray and James Fox are at the National Archives, and Ray's holding up the piece of paper that Hynek drew. It has the inverted V, but it has a bar at the top, a bar in the middle, and a bar underneath. And that symbol, it just can't be found anywhere. And that's why the conclusion is that it's just maybe a warning sign or something like that. But alchemy, it just means some type of strange metal, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think from a visual standpoint, and Tony had the idea that it might not be static. The symbol could change depending on what it's doing.
Imagine you have a Mac mouse that lights up when you move it, and you don't. If there's anything on the mouse that's like glass, and different symbols pop up. Is it possible that shell of this UFO is kind of like an iPhone, where it can change symbols at random on that white glassy surface?
Yeah, it could have been not a static symbol, but a dynamic symbol.
Maybe when it lands, it turns green.
Yeah. Maybe it says Eat at Joe's when it's near a restaurant.
Right.
Now, did any other people that saw this craft ever mention anything about a symbol, or did they just say they saw this flying low? Or
funny enough, no one's ever mentioned a symbol.
Well, actually,
somebody mentioned a symbol.
And one report that I put in the book, and the Lorenzes, Carol, or is it Corral? I never pronounced that right.
I think
Corral and the Lorenzes who were there at the site actually at the time, before anybody actually, who found the fused sand. But basically, they found a report, and I found it and put it in the book, where a pilot had said, "I'm seeing an egg-shaped craft that passed me," and he was a military Air Force pilot. And White Sand said, "Reacquire the target." And he reacquired it. And he goes, It looks like what Lonnie Zamora recorded. He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It has the same symbol." He doesn't describe what the symbol is, but at the time this was reported, the only symbol known was the inverted V of 3 bars. So that is recorded, and White Sands actually says they had radar tracking this object. So it's a pretty good report. And what's unusual is in UFO lore, as you know, Martin, there's not a whole lot of cases that have a symbol on the side of the craft at all. A lot of hoaxes, the UMO and things like that, but there's not. It's very rare. I can't. About the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Right. No, I agree. It is. So, what did you uncover? You're revisiting the book. You went there 4 times. You dug through. Let's talk about some of the things that you uncovered that probably weren't known originally, at the time of this sighting.
You talking about the woman, the house on the canal?
Yeah, there's this lady we came across she's passed away, who had a house that had like a porch. She would take a look at the river at night, and she said that she witnessed what Lonnie described, hovering along the river down from
the reservoir that comes from Albuquerque. Towards Socorro.
And her house was situated just before this craft veered away from the water into the arroyo.
Towards the Opal Grinders gas station.
Right, towards Opal Grinders gas station. She said there's things coming off the bottom of it. I don't know if they were sparking and falling down. There was also another young man who claimed that he also saw things coming off of this craft, and hearsay stories that they picked up what looked like circuit boards and things like this, but we've not found any of this evidence and not seen any of it.
Yeah, the when we were in Socorro, and this is the difference between researching this from behind a computer and being on site. This woman was just sitting on her porch, and there's a reservoir, and we went out there, and Tony found it pretty easily, which I'm a terrible navigator.
I think we have a GoPro. Ben,
we have an hour of footage of me randomly talking about I don't know what, but we found there's a reservoir that points towards Albuquerque and comes down, and when you leave the reservoir, you're pointing towards the gas station where the witness for Opal Grinder said the thing almost hit his car. And this local resident, the thing you find out about Socorro when you're there is a lot of them have never left. They were there in '64. They remember what happened. A lot of people don't leave Socorro. It's a nice town. They, unless they graduate from the school and go there, those aren't people that actually live there. But the local residents stay there. And so this woman had passed, but she said it came down the reservoir, which is a depressed area with growth around it, like most waterways are. It came down there, glided silently, passed by, and then headed towards where the witness that at Opal Grinders gas station saw it. And nobody had heard this story. And it was just randomly, it's like, oh yeah, this lady, I knew her. I knew it was, and it was one of these things that never made the paper. And so we had a couple of interviews like that where we came across people. In the book, I have Patrick Richards' encounter with Lonnie, where he discusses what the true symbol is, where he actually pointed to a napkin and pointed towards the inverted V of 3 bars. And then I have another scientist, Mike Moore, who ran into Lonnie right before he passed away. And Lonnie took him to the site because Mike Moore was a radiation scientist and was concerned about having cancer from radiation. So he took Lonnie to the site, and I have that in the book. That's an encounter nobody's ever heard of, where he told the scientist about what happened. And he didn't know anything about Socorro. He didn't care about UFOs or anything. But he ran into him in a gift shop in Socorro when they were both trying to get something kind of jewelry made. And he took Lonnie took him to the site and described what happened and asked him, look, could I have been poisoned with radiation? So I have that whole story in the book. And so there's a lot of things we ran across in our investigation that add to, the whole point of the book was to bring it up to date, incorporate Ray's data, and Ray wrote some great stuff for several chapters that are current and up to date with what has happened since he published this book in the late 70s. And I had to bring in the Craigslist data and all the stuff that Tony and I did on site. And so I really just wanted to do a 2020 story of what actually happened with this case, because it's always wrong on TV. It's almost Sightings was the last TV show to get it right. This is a long time ago. UFO Hunters did a good job. I like the episode with Bill Burns and those guys. They did a pretty good job, and that was the last interview before Lonnie passed away. But the important thing was to tell the story right, to cut through all the BS, talk about the hoax theories, dismiss those, talk about the investigation, the Craigslist files that were found by Rob Mercer, and bring all that together up to the unfortunately the year of COVID-19 and tell the story correctly, so future generations can know exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's good. So let's talk about Rob Mercer's find, which was quite amazing. He found these files on Craigslist, and there was all kinds of information. It was from I can't remember it was a retired major or something.
Moreno.
Yeah.
Moreno.
And they actually he said, well, we have some more. And so he even got more out of it. And now that's housed down at Dave Marler's library down there, which is amazing. So what was found in there in regards to Socorro in those papers?
Well, Rob shared all of that file with us before. He sent it to Mr. Greenwald's site, the Black Vault, which does a great job of housing UFO materials. But basically, it was when he reached out to him, he was retired, and the files were found, I think, by his son. I can't quite remember, but the house was being renovated. It was in a garage underneath some stuff, but it was Blue Book files. It was files that weren't in the related to Socorro. There were 182 pages related to Socorro.
Wow.
And when Kevin Randall did he did a great book on the same case, Encounter in the Desert. I consider Kevin a friend. But the thing about the files were that even though a lot of people say they weren't in the Blue Book files, they were written by the Blue Book investigators about this case. So to me, they are Blue Book files. They just weren't included in the official file that came out. And so I put all this in the book to explain, they missed a lot of stuff. There were a lot of things left out of the files. There were a lot of things that weren't included in the official report on Socorro that Blue Book investigated. It shows you the time and effort that they put into it, spent God knows how much money, and the FBI, CIA, DIA, I don't think DIA existed, but all the intelligence agencies and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were all asking questions. What happened? What can you tell us? Give me the information. And so those files showed the details that they went to and the length of time and money that was spent to try to figure out what happened. The president wanted to know. Everybody wanted to know. And the answer to this day is still unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Well, I think it's kind of interesting that, Ray figured that Lonnie was about 36 feet from the object, and in the Blue Book files, it shows 150 feet. I wonder why the discrepancy on something like that.
Yeah, Blue Book not only got a lot of stuff wrong, you can't even read half the stuff they write because their grammar is so poor.
Really?
Wow. They would get names wrong. They would have incomplete sentences. You couldn't understand what they were saying half the time.
Sort of shorthand writing, in a way?
Like that. And not only shorthand writing, but with the wrong facts, wrong information.
It was a lot of notes that were just disjointed. It was funny because when the one story I got from the physical scientist, Mike Moore, that Lonnie took down to the site, he seemed to indicate that he was even closer than the 36 feet. And it's interesting because Ray had paced it off with Dr. Hynek and got 36 feet. That's close enough to see everything you needed to see about the symbol and everything else with regards to that. But when Lonnie was driving up and was looking out his window at the creatures, I think he got really closer than he indicated. And even in Michael Moore's statement that he wrote for the book for me, he said that Lonnie said, look, there are a lot of things that he had referenced without saying Ray's book, but he said he kind of indicated that I was closer than what I even told Ray. So it was interesting because I think at that point when he was looking out the window, what he thought were people in trouble, at some point he realized they weren't even human.
And also when we spoke to Lonnie's daughter, she indicated that his response to what happened was so profound. Him speaking to his priest at the local church, and he was so confounded freaked out, and he just it changed his life so much that obviously he saw more than what he says.
Yeah, when you're looking at something that's 4 foot tall and you're looking at what appears to be a down craft, you kind of don't have a whole lot of choices as to what you're looking at. And the fact that when he first had white coveralls and then changed that later in his life, I think white coveralls was a way to say, look, I don't even want to think about it or talk about it. I'm just going to say it was this white blur and kind of leave me alone at that point, which Burns, the FBI agent, suggested to him to stop talking about the creatures because you're just going to catch grief about it.
Well, speaking of that, since you mentioned it, what type of grief did Lonnie? I mean, he was very well respected as a man of, an honest man, a great police officer. But did he get ridiculed?
Yeah, the kids in the town, they would taunt him all the time.
Really?
And even some of the adults as well. He decided to change careers, and he was working at the local refuse.
Oh, yes, I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, he got calls from all over the world. He had offers, and I a lot of this I found out when researching, when we researched for the book, was he had Japan and Australia and all these places were calling him for interviews and wanted to pay him money and do the documentary and do this. And he was like, I'm just sick of it. I just don't want to hear about it. Yeah. And he got to the point where I have a lot of hyperlinks in the book about his interviews that we found during our research, but basically he just said, you know, if I could do it over again, I'd never tell you that I ever saw anything, because he was just sick of it. Mm-hmm. He didn't want the attention. He could have monetized it. He never did.
Right. And it wasn't even a one landing event. There were multiple landings, and the police officers and people in town kind of realized that there's no way they're going to tell this story all over again. So there was landings after this. There's
a whole chapter on other egg-shaped craft landings. So there's, gosh, for 20, 30 years, there's evidence of multiple egg-shaped, football-shaped, however you want to describe it, inverted bathtub-type landings in and around the area. And especially during Lonnie's encounter, there was incursions on White Sands, there was incursions in Alamogordo, there was incursions in, you know, multiple cities in that area. So it wasn't a one-off event like a lot of people thought. And even Kevin Randall, when he interviewed us for his show, he thought it was a one-witness event. And when you really do your digging, it's not a one-witness event. It's a multiple layer of events that happened that many people saw in different areas and times.
You know, it's really amazing because when I think about you telling me in the area, these egg-shaped craft were seen, and you hear this a lot about particular types of craft that are seen repeatedly, you know, the Belgium Triangle, you know, they're just seen over and over and over again. And it's confined to a small geographic area, which I think is baffling, because if that craft got here from wherever it came, why would it stick in one place and not explore? It's kind of a big earth. You know, do you ever...
It was kind of a hotbed if you consider all the historical incidents from the past, present, and who knows what's coming next. But that area, Mexico to New Mexico, and you can probably draw lines and figure out, you know, where all these places have in common. But it is interesting that the egg-shaped craft is something that's been seen throughout history. In fact, I was just telling Ben over the weekend, I was visiting my girlfriend in Southern Virginia, and I saw these two white spherical looking orbs circling each other, crossing the sky in about 12 seconds. My phone was inside. I got the binoculars after that, trying to catch it again. Never came back.
Wow.
But classic UFO story.
You know what I mean? And so that, to me, I was thinking to myself, wow. And that's something I'm not even going to bother reporting, because I just saw something in the sky. Absolutely no proof of it.
The fact that during some homework, and it's with the internet, it's not hard to do, but there were so many egg-shaped craft seen in France and Europe and in America, but especially along this 60 West corridor. So when you look at the map and you go from Socorro to Datil and Magdalena and all these places where all these UFO events have happened over time, there was evidence of an egg-shaped craft reported throughout that area, not just by civilians, but by military police officers, sheriffs, state troopers, and military people at bases and tracked on radar. So that whole chapter in the book was to show you that this wasn't a one-off event. And there were a lot of reports before and after this event about egg-shaped craft, maybe a similar type of craft being reported. So I really kind of wanted to amalgamate all of the data we found from all the years that showed that Lonnie was just in the middle of a tremendous event and flap that was going on at the time.
Wow. Now, I know there are statistics where they show, you know, for UFO sightings, there are, you know, there's so many disc shapes, there's so many triangle shapes, orbs, et cetera, like that. Do the egg shape even come up on a list like that, as far as a percentage, a very small percentage of sightings?
Chapter 4, the last chapter of my book is from Cheryl Costa, who did an egg-shaped vehicle analysis for me. and showed that, it's rare, but there are many cases of egg-shaped craft. So it was a perfect ending to the book for her chapter. She had written this report for the Syracuse Journal in New York, and so she allowed me to, reprint that in the book. But it shows egg-shaped craft, or egg. When you do the history of this cosmic egg, the fact that life, the chicken and the egg, however you want to describe it, it's a cosmic symbol. The egg seems to be a cosmic symbol. And when you're talking about an egg-shaped flying craft, you're talking about something that is kind of aerodynamic, but without any lifting agents or anything. Then you're talking about some type of, and this is why we're not all flying around in egg-shaped cars, but you're talking about some type of exotic propulsion, which has to be anti-gravity in some form or another. I can't really think unless it's magnetic or something. But when you have an egg-shaped object with no airfoils, no engines, no exhaust, no plume, not even a glow, or possibly a plasma glow around it or whatever, but that's the type of propulsion which is unknown. And we don't fly. If this was our own tech in 64, we certainly be seeing egg-shaped craft flying around from our military apparatus in 2020. So I still don't think it was one of ours. And I have a whole chapter on this, about why it's not ours. If any company or government agency had produced this in 64, they'd be happy to tell you about it now and say, hey, that was ours, man. We fooled the heck out of you guys.
Yeah. An egg is almost like a sphere as far as, pressure. It absorbs pressure very well, unlike other structures. And who knows if that plays into exactly, why this was egg-shaped. And that was one of my main questions I wanted to ask you is how long have people seen egg shaped craft? And you say all the way back in France, many years ago?
Way before that.
I would venture to even say the dawn of time.
Yeah, way back. There were. It depends on the current technology of the time. So they would say oblong sphere. They would say telephone pole, upside down bathtub, football shaped. But then as you go further back in time, cigar shaped. A elongated saucer. There's just different descriptions trying to describe something that's more like an ellipsoid.
I mean, I've seen even the Egyptian carvings of egg-shaped, including for the cave paintings in France. That are some of the oldest cave paintings. There was an ellipsoidal-looking carving in the stone.
Interesting. We're going into break in 2 minutes, and I just wanted to, because during the break, I'm gonna run a Lonnie Zamora audio clip of him being interviewed. But let's lead up to that and let's talk about Lonnie. Do you agree with the statement I made earlier that the reason this case, the main reason this case is so strong is because of Lonnie?
Chapter 4, I think it is in the book, is the nature of Lonnie Zamora. So I covered that in great detail, especially after talking to Diana, Lonnie's daughter, and doing some work. Tony and I talked to a lot of people in town that knew Lonnie, and through our investigative research, we got a pretty good idea of who Lonnie was, and I built a whole chapter around that. So to understand the nature of this case, you have to start with who reported it. Who was the sole witness?
We spoke to one of his best friends, Paul Hardin, and he said that, no disrespect, but Lonnie was not clever enough to pull off something like this as a hoax, because he was a simple guy, simple, honest guy who just was a downright great police officer and honest person. So, and he didn't mean anything negative about it. He just meant to say that there's no way that his mind could have conceived of something this complex.
He didn't care about UFOs. It was not on his horizon at all. So this is totally out of context with the character of the person, and talking to his friends and his family. In his life, he said, if I could do it over, I would never have told anybody this happened.
Yeah, I get that. All right, well, it's time for us to go into break. And this clip that I'm going to be playing is a interview with Lonnie back in April 24th, 1964, interviewed by NICAP's Streeter Stewart, Oh, actually, April 29th is when this was of the same year.
I was chasing a reckless driver going up south on Park Street. Up to the time I came to this little road, I heard this big roar blast. We got a dynamite check to the west there. I thought I'd investigate maybe. I thought maybe blow it up. So I started up there real fast. Halfway through it, I stuck my head out the window, out of the car, and I seen this white object. I didn't know what it was at that time. I thought it was a car that had turned over, vehicle that turned over. I started out real fast so I could maybe help the people in the car. I went up to it, closed about 200 feet. I was 200 feet from it. I got off the car and started toward it when I heard this big noise again, same noise, and the flame coming from under it. I got scared and started running back. I ran about 50 feet from it. I pulled myself to the ground to hide. Afterwards, I didn't hear the noise no more. I just lifted up my head to see what was happening. It was real quiet then, and I saw this white object just take off towards the west there, smooth out.
Did it leave any kind of a vapor trail when it took off?
No, sir, it didn't. Just quiet, no trail, no nothing.
But it did make a roar at the time you approached it.
A big roar, yes, sir, yes.
And you could actually see the flame in under it?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was it standing on legs?
Yes, sir, its legs. I called it legs, yes.
And you thought there were 4 of these?
Apparently there was on the markings on the ground. It was 4 legs, yes.
In other words, you examined it later on?
Yes, we did. Me and state police, New Mexico State Police.
After it took off, did you go back to get help?
No, I radioed help from the car and he came on out, yes.
I see. And when you went back to examine it, what did you find near where it had been parked?
Well, the bush was there around there, greasewood and grass was still burning. So, and I saw these markings on the ground, prints and everything else.
There were prints as if it had been standing on these legs.
Right.
Did the legs go up into the object when it took off? Did you notice that?
No, sir, I didn't notice it was fast.
And after it got into the air, did the roar stop?
Yes, sir, when it came straight up.
All right. Back with my guests, Tony and Ben, or Ben and Tony, Ben Moss and Tony Angiola. And we are back, guys.
You got me. Ben is still in the bathroom.
Okay, no problem. Not that we're going to embarrass him or anything. Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. Hey, Tony, so let's continue on. One of the things I think is fascinating about this case is the hoax theories. And who I know a university perpetuated a hoax. I believe it was them, or there was one person in particular. I think his last name begins with a B. Do I have that right? It sounds I can't remember. Ray told me about it.
Yeah, Ray likes to call him Dr. Toothpaste, I think, because the last name's Colgate. And,
Colgate. Well, C. Yeah. Okay.
So basically, he was doing one of these explanations. You can't get there from here excuses, and therefore it must be a hoax, with absolutely no investigation, no proof to the contrary, anything like this. So he was very easy to dispel, because at the end of the day, he really didn't want to have anything to do with this. He was he didn't have a very good track record. Let's say he likes to party, and he just really wasn't that credible of a person to say anything at all about this case. And Ben, I'm sure, details that. We're talking about Dr. Toothpaste. Ben just got back.
Dr. Toothpaste.
Colgate.
Yeah. What did he say? Didn't he say they put like the college students did this as a hoax, and they put like a video screen up? Do I have that right? Something bizarre.
So they were using a car to pull a balloon.
No, initially, I have the whole timeline in the book. Initially, he said This is quote verbatim. It was a candle in a balloon, not sophisticated. That's how he ended this letter. And so he had to build upon that because he told a lie, because his primary belief was they can't get there from here. So this has to be a student hoax. So he didn't have it on any good authority. It was a student hoax. He basically assumed it was. And the two students he named, we found them. And one said he wasn't on campus, and the other said he was studying for exams. He didn't know why Colgate threw him under the bus. So they both denied it. But
was in the hospital. We went down there.
Well, no, he was dying. One was in bad shape.
We
asked to interview them. I found out through 3 different sources who they were, and that through credible sources that from Socorro that lived there a long time. And even the bartender who knew Lonnie was a bartender throughout this whole period, and he was a PhD graduate of New Mexico Tech. So everybody knew everybody, and the fact that if somebody created a hoax, it would have come out. You would have said years after any penalties for doing a hoax would have exonerated you. You would have come out and say, "Hey, it was me. I did it. Hire me for Hollywood," whatever the case. That never happened. And so Tony and I's investigation, we cover all these points in the book closely because I want to give both sides of the story. I looked for every reason for this to be not what it looks like it turned out to be, which was extraterrestrial visitation, but all the evidence pointed to the fact that there was no earthly explanation for everything that occurred.
And there was another theory that it was a like a module, United States tech. And what about that one? I'm sure you've looked into that one too.
You mean the lunar module?
Yeah, like the lunar module. Yeah.
Yeah,
we wasn't even flying.
Yeah, we have a document showing that Blue Book investigated and said that does not put this there at this time. But there's a couple of things wrong with that. White Sands is about 35 miles off of this public desert. You wouldn't test a top secret lunar module in Socorro when you had hundreds of thousands of acres of government property tested on. Secondly, our research showed that this thing didn't even have a test flight on the day. It was canceled. And the only thing going on at the time of the lunar module was it was being dropped from a Bell helicopter by cables to test the integrity of the struts. And the landing gear of this was round, and the landing gear of the Socorro object was triangular shape. So you don't have any flights on that day. The first flight actually happened in California, far away from Socorro, New Mexico. The fact that they use a hydroxide caustic type of material to power the engine caused the engine to be rebuilt every time they tested it. Because this engine was designed to fly in space, not in atmosphere. So every time they tested it, it crashed after about 30 seconds. They had to rebuild the engine. It certainly couldn't fly for more than, even on the test, it didn't fly for more than a minute or so. And what Lonnie Zamora recorded flew for a lot longer than that at great distances at high speed.
I think it hovered longer than
it hovered. I mean, the module didn't carry 2 people at the time. It carried 1 person. Everything's wrong about the lunar module. And even NASA and Hughes Aircraft and everybody, I have all the documents from the Craigslist file that said it wasn't ours. We weren't flying. Hector Quintanilla had all the top secret clearances. And since the Joint Chief of Staffs, the president, the CIA, FBI, all wanted answers, you had to tell them the truth. So everything that was told through these documents that Rob Mercer found and through the Blue Book files are accurate. They didn't know what the heck was going on. They could not explain the vehicle that landed at that time.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the way the thing hovered, in particular is pretty bizarre. And I still can't get over the fact that it made no sound and then it made a big roar. I mean, it's just, it is baffling how
like
that.
What Tony said, there's a tertiary engine and there's a secondary engine.
Yeah.
So if this thing, the egg shape, I would imagine it came from a larger craft, and but if it was designed to penetrate the atmosphere, the blue flame was the engine to land and operate in space and not harm anything, because the the gravitational or whatever principles when they engaged the secondary engine. So the engine that cut off, when the blue flame cut off and that thing was hovering, that was a completely different type of technology operating at that point that maybe was not meant to operate if they especially knew there was a human standing near there. So I think they actually, kind of like the Travis Walton case, where they did something to protect an unknown witness that popped out of nowhere they weren't expecting, then engaged the secondary engine when it was safe to get the hell out of there and, you know, hopefully not be seen.
Right. So I'm just letting people in the chat know, you know, we're going to be taking calls in the half hour, but if you're in chat and you have a question, please put it in caps so I catch it. You know, so Lonnie at one time, you know, he mentioned the beings, but later on he thought they were not of this world, which I think is really quite the statement. But I know that Lonnie said that, you know, there were a lot of accounts of this story that happened, and he told his daughter that Ray Stanford's book was the only accurate account. Is that right? I mean, that's...
Yeah, basically, when she was asking her father about the case, he pointed to Ray's book and said, read that. He's the only one that got it right.
And did she try to get him to talk about it, and he did not want to talk about it?
He would never talk to her about it, but he spoke to his son extensively about it.
Really?
Unfortunately, his son's not one to speak about this to
and I confirmed when we were in Socorro and we met with her, I brought that story up because Ray told us that initially, and I said, is this the way this happened? She goes, absolutely. And so when she asked him, Lonnie pointed to Ray's book and goes, he's the only guy that got it right. And he had it right there in his bookshelf. And, you know, the thing was that when you do a book like this and try to find out what the answer is, the whole behavior behind Lonnie and what happened after the fact tells a lot. It's kind of like with our friend Travis. We know Travis pretty well, and we know how he's kind of like a, not to be disparaging, but kind of like a deer in the headlights after the event. Sometimes you get the feeling that the person really believes that they experienced something that they're telling you, and it may be true. And Lonnie was the same way. He changed so much after the incident that he had a traumatic experience that kind of blew his mind away about what the way the world was shaped. And I tried to capture that in the book because, you know, it's probably one of the most neglected close encounters of the third kind in the United States history, but it's one of the most evidential cases. And the more that Tony and I dug onto this, the more we kept finding. And I got to the point where I couldn't put everything in the book because I published it myself and I just didn't have the funds to make a 500-page book like our buddy, you know, did with Reynolds and Forrest, Chuck.
Chuck.
Chuck, yeah. Chuck. Yeah. What's that? I can't remember. God, senior moment. You know, Reynolds from Forrest guy. Charles Halt. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He did a great book, but he goes, I'm selling it for $50. I go, how much did it cost you to make? He goes, $45. I'm like, oh, okay. You're not making any money. And that's the way it is.
I know. I remember talking to him about that. I couldn't believe that book cost him $45 to publish.
I don't make anything off the book. The amount of effort we put into everything, the point of the book was to get the stories told straight. I don't care about money or anything like that.
And it's in color, so it's expensive.
Oh, yeah, well, it is in color. But Ray's contribution, I mean, the stories that we uncovered and the anecdotal stories and the research on the ground, to me, it was priceless. And the 6 people who did the review beforehand, I reached out to a lot of people. They just were so busy they couldn't get to it at the time to give me a review. But everybody I sent it to gave me an excellent review, which tells me I feel like I did a good job of retelling the story that Tony and I have been looking at for 5 years now.
Yes, I've been enjoying it as I'm reading it. And someone on Facebook just asked the question, basically, where can they're interested to get this book. How can they get it?
You can go to the UFO guys on Facebook, or you can just reach out. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Ben Moss on Facebook, or you can just send me an email. My email for the and we'll figure it out with the private emails, but it's JBMOSS, so JBMOSS09 at gmail.com. It's one of those Gmail addresses where I had to figure out some kind of, so JBMoss09 at gmail.com. We'll figure out a way to, it's $30 shipped, everything included, about 250 pages, but it shows all the work that Tony and I put into this to tell the story straight. And all the feedback I've gotten, everybody loves the book so far. I hope I'm not being facetious in that way, but that's what everybody told me. They could be lying, but I don't think they are. But I really believe that we've updated the story to 2020, including the Craigslist files, and told the story in a way, because another reason for Tony and I to jump on this was we've seen so many TV shows and other types of portrayals of the story, and almost everybody got it wrong. The last show to get this right was UFO Hunters and Sightings from the 1980s that actually did a good depiction of this. Everybody else has told it terribly wrong with bad information. So wanted to say that there was a great case in the USA that happened that was a close encounter of the third time, and you should know the true facts of that case. And so that's the 5-year journey that Tony and I were on.
Yeah. So let's talk about where they got it wrong and your corrections.
Well,
where do you begin? Wow.
A lot of that had to do with Ray Stanford. I mean, Ray's book was the definitive thing. Is Ray's book 79 or 77 was 15,000 copies were printed, and so not a good printing. Ray got ripped off in every country. Every country we've seen all the covers and everything. Every country reprinted it and ripped it off, and that's one of the reasons why I'm self-publishing with no digital archives for this book. You got to get it from me if you want it, not for money reasons, but because I don't want to get ripped off. But the point is that, you want to fill in some.
For example, we were on Hangar 1, and the way they depicted Lonnie's encounter was a flamethrower in the middle of all these mountains and forests. And I was like, I don't remember seeing all these forests and hills last time we were in the desert.
One of the first chapter of my book is the reason for writing the book. And when I asked Ray, and Ray goes, why the hell, I took out hell, but he goes, why the hell are you writing a book about Socorro? And I go, that's a very valid question. And my reason was because it needs to be retold, especially with Ray's help, telling the right story, because so many people have gotten it wrong since then. History is told by the winners and the losers, and, in this year, especially in 2020, of fake news and things like that, you want to tell the story using the facts as it actually happened. That was my goal. And that's what I think I did. And so with Ray's help, Ray was the only living person that's still alive that was there in 1964, invited by Dr. Hynek to the site. He experienced everything firsthand. The book couldn't have been written without Tony, without Ray. I mean, they were integral in everything that made this book come together. It's just an update at this point to try to get the story straight, because there's a lot. I saw a recent show on TV where it said it landed on 3 legs, and I know the guy that said the words. I'm like, oh my God, come on, dude, do a little homework before you start saying what's on the teleprompter for you.
We got to fix Wikipedia too, because we know people that do a lot of Wikipedia.
I've done a lot of Wikipedia work.
It's wrong.
It's like even on Hangar 1, when I saw something on the teleprompter that wasn't right, I'd be like, whoa, let's change that verbiage. But the whole point was to make the story accurate, tell it from Lonnie's perspective, and Tony and I's investigation with using Ray, who's the only living person that was there at the time, and to get it right, because future generations, they've got a lot to pick from of BS that tells the stories wrong, but they can look at Socorro's Hostel and Pentagon Pantry, our book, and I give Kevin props for Encounter in the Desert. He did a good job of kind of reiterating what actually happened. So I'm not in competition with anybody, and we certainly don't do this for the money. You
spend so many years, doing something, and you kind of just want to have a way to finalize it, and be able to put everything together. Especially we have so many people always asking us, when are you going to put a book out?
Yeah, when we did a presentation for Kecksburg, the crowd asked us to investigate Kecksburg. And I go, well, Stan Corden has done that. You got to research.
Yeah, done a great job.
But, Ray Stanford did the homework. We just updated it. We're not reinventing the wheel, but we owe everything to Ray and his work when he was there. He showed why this was such an unusual event. And pretty much kind of when we met him and got on the path to do this, it was just an extension of his work, basically. And so we got a few new stories. We got a few bits of information, and we took away the hoax theories with data, scientifically debated them in the book, and discounted them for the fraud that they are. So we told the story in a way that is backed up by the science and the data and the investigators that were there at the time. And that was the whole purpose of the book, was to let people go, okay, what happened to Socorro? Let me read this book, and I will get an exact story of what happened.
And, I had a text come in from someone that's listening, and he's, not through the chat, but just a plain text, saying, he doesn't really buy this, as he thinks it's our own tech. And, I simply shot a text back, what about the little creatures? Why would they be, why would we have tiny people, and why haven't we seen this thing around if it's our tech? He basically said it was probably a dud. But he kind of associates it with the Cash Landrum case. And do you get that? Have you heard that one before?
No, I mean, I haven't heard that anyone said the Socorro was a dud of
I don't get the Cash Landrum correlation at all, because that was some type of device that was definitely radioactive.
That was very radioactive.
But the fact that you have to look at this, the fact that the FBI, the CIA, Project Blue Book, Dr. Hynek, and everybody else, White Sands, and all these bases, Hector Quintanilla got a top secret clearance to go to every single base and find this object. None of them could solve the case, and this is all in the book. None of them could solve the case. Millions of dollars of research with the entire Defense Intelligence Agency behind you. Do you think they would have reported a result they found? Sure. They wouldn't call it an unknown now if they didn't know it. They could have come out and said, oh, vertical takeoff vehicle, top secret, forget about it, don't talk about it again. They never did that, which is surprising to me. They never came out and said, oh, we know what it was, we can't tell you.
Well, let's just talk about the present day. There is no vertical takeoff vehicle that uses electromagnetism or plasma technology to levitate unless it's moving wind beneath it.
Yeah.
Everything's pushing wind down.
One of the
only thing we have.
The contributions in the book that were very important was I had David Rudiak and Donald Burleson contribute about radiation and the way radiation works, and the fact that this radiation that fogged Ted Jordan's camera had a half-life of between 8 and 14 hours. And there's not many radiations like that. When you talk about isotopes, they decay at like 128 million years for half of it, and it's still radioactive for another 128 million years. The shortest half-lives we have don't correspond to the radiation that was left there. So when you put all the facts together, the fact that the government actually said we had no device operating at this time, no vertical takeoff vehicle, the lunar module wasn't operating, there was nothing else. In my book, we talk about Bell Labs, Hughes Laboratory, NASA. Every single agency that could create a flying vehicle was investigated at this time. They all had to report, because this came from the Joint Chief of Staff. They all had to say it was not ours. If you want to talk about it, go through this secret liaison. And I have all these documents in the book that showed up on, Blue Book documents and the Craigslist file that Rob Mercer found. There was a lot left out of the Blue Book files in the background where they investigated Hughes, Lockheed Martin, all the companies that could design and build craft at the time were asked, was this yours? And every single one of them had to answer, because it came from the top, came from the president, the Joint Chief of Staff. All said, look, you can come look at everything we have, but we did not build that object. And so in the book, we also cover the fact that Russia, China, and all these other countries never came forward and go, hey, look, we fooled you 70 years ago, 60 years ago. and it was ours. Too bad. Gotcha. And the point that I make in the book is that we'd all be flying our own personal eggs right now if this was tech we had in '64.
I thought the Jetsons were programming us at
yeah, we're the flying cars. We should have flying cars by now. Right. The whole point is that the tech displayed in '64 cannot be replicated today, and we still don't have elliptical-shaped objects, except perhaps the Oumuamua, or whatever that object was that entered our solar system from another solar system, circled us and left again. That was the most interesting thing that I could relate to an elliptical-shaped object that happened in the last 5 years or so.
Now, what about the flames? That part, the only other thing I can think of is, the Falcon Lake incident, but I can't really think of any UFO that's shooting flames out. Has that ever occurred that you're aware of?
The beams, I mean, we had the one case, so I don't know if it's Falcon Lake, over the reservoir where the beams stopped in midair and had kind of a funnel shape. The plasma display underneath the Socorro object was kind of funnel shaped, so it was wider at the bottom than at the top. But the fact that it irradiated the soil, knifed into the ground, didn't cook Lonnie or blow him 30 feet in the air, tells you it wasn't propulsion. It was some type of subatomic material going at light speed into the ground to lift what was estimated at a 9-ton object. From the impressions in the ground, they estimated this was a 9-ton object that came in at an angle. So to lift that type of object, the thrust required would have killed Lonnie and decimated everything in the area. So the blue flame was unusual, and I have that in the book. The 2 papers I have about the I don't even understand the paper myself. You read it. What Don Bertelsen, as a PhD scientist, describes as irradiation. Unless you're a PhD scientist, you might not understand it, but basically saying is the radiation that was displayed at the site is not earthly at all for it to have a half-life of 8 to 10 hours. Because Ted Jordan, who always carried a camera, took pictures right away. He got the reward back from the government, followed by radiation. We have Hynek on the tape that Ray has saying that we've shown in our presentation for the 12 seconds we were allowed, saying that indeed the film was followed by radiation. But then the next morning, there was no radiation. So for a half-life to disappear that quickly, you're talking about an exotic propulsion from some type of engine that is way beyond our comprehension.
Wow. Well, and let's see. I think what I'm going to do is we have a question that came up. It's totally unrelated, but to our topic. But I still told people I would ask a question, and they want to know what do you want disclosure, or do you enjoy the UFO mystery as it is? I've never heard that question before.
One disclosure.
We love this topic.
I have to say, I must say I do not want disclosure because I don't believe it would be true if it was. Does that make any sense?
Why don't you elaborate on that a little? You don't trust that it would be true?
I do not. If there was disclosure, and by that I mean, everyone's fantasy of disclosures, the government comes out, admits, that all these things we've been seeing on television are true, yada, yada, we were wrong. I don't see that happening. There's just literally no logical reasoning for it. At the end of the day, all they're going to do is suffer panic and probably hysteria and riots and things like this. Who knows what? We lost control.
Well, some people would argue that we've been kind of getting eased. You're right. That we've been kind of getting eased into it.
Here's my take, and I've posted this on Facebook, much to the chagrin of many people. Disclosure is a disinformation tactic that has worked for many years. Disclosure is the carrot they dangle in front of you. And this is for the ancient aliens crowd. It's just out of reach. You can almost grasp it, but you're always just missing it. The reality is, a la the Matrix, is there is no carrot. There is no disclosure. Disclosure is the myth that they create to lead you down rabbit holes to think that there's an answer coming up. The fact is, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know what it is. They can't even describe it. They're baffled. They don't want to tell you that. So the last thing the government's going to do is go, look, there's something happening. They might be abducting people. They might be incursions on our greatest government properties, and there's nothing we can do about it. But hey, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. That is the last thing that'll ever happen. So disclosure is a front, a disinformation program to let you believe that you're going to be saved, and that some greater power is going to bring us to salvation. It's all BS.
Well, I agree with at least part of that, and because we've seen it over and over again, from such a long time ago, and I heard John Greenwald the other night on Coast to Coast. I didn't agree with everything he said, but he said something along that line where we've seen this before, and he doesn't hold, he doesn't hold any faith that, it's going to happen. Here's a question from the chat. And does the Tic Tac UFO resemble the Socorro object? It's similar, right? I mean, just on the ends.
Well, considering the fact that none of us saw it firsthand.
Except my encounter.
Well, but I'm saying we weren't at Socorro in 1964.
My little Tic Tac encounter of the object.
I'm talking about Socorro. We were not in 1964 Socorro watching what Lonnie saw, so there's no telling if that is the exact same craft.
I'm just saying
it could resemble it on any other level, sure, but I don't know.
The thing is, and Tony's right, when you're talking about an egg-shaped craft, if it moves at high speed, it might look like a Tic Tac. It might look like a streak. It might look like a telephone pole. But what I was reiterating was, remember that little object that you didn't see when I was at Socorro?
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Right.
When we were at Socorro, Tony, we were filming, but I wasn't obviously in the right direction. But an object was ground terraining. I could see it coming. And I played professional tennis. I can track an object moving fast. This thing was probably, I figured it out later, it's like maybe 4.5 seconds. But it came ground terraining, so it was lifting and elevating, and then it disappeared and went over the berm where we were at Socorro and went out of sight. And I swear to God, it looked like a Tic Tac, but it was only about this big. And I think that maybe because it was moving so fast, it was blurred, and I don't know the true shape. But these Tic Tacs that the guys are seeing, if they saw it stationary, it looked like a Tic Tac, that's one thing. But you're really close to describing egg-shaped objects. And the thing with these objects is maybe they project what you want to see or what's more comfortable for you to see. So if you're more comfortable seeing a 747 than a flying saucer, maybe they'll make it a little more, it's kind of like you get into Freud and the observer and the observed. You get into the point where what if the thing you're observing knows what you're looking at and then adjusts accordingly to not freak you out. And so a lot of these UFO observations seem to kind of go along that path, especially when you get into abductions and things like that. But it seems like they can understand everything that's going through your mind, every emotion you're having, and try, on the one hand, try to make it easier. On the other hand, we have reports where it's the most horrible experience on Earth. And, if you look at the bazillion UFO encounters and things like that.
We have Ray. We have the call-in is ready. And that number is 855-472-5483 if anyone wants to call into the show. And we have actually Ray Stanford on the phone right now. Ray, welcome to the show. It's my fault. Hang on. Here we go. Ray, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here.
Hey, Ray.
Hey, Ray.
Hi, Tony and Ben. I saw a question pop up on the screen. I couldn't resist calling in on it. Said, "Did Ray get a photo of the object over our mountains in the background? Did you just see it?" Well, I did not get a photo, but I showed them a photo that. Let me explain how it happened. When I had been to Socorro, and I went back to Phoenix, I had my films processed at a local photo lab, and when they made copies, they didn't do a good job of cleaning the negative. And amazingly, they left something on the negative that when the prints resulted, and Ben and Tony have seen it, it really looked like the Socorro object out there over the mountains looking to the west. But everybody was enthusiastic, and But I said, wait, we got to hold on. I've got to find the original negative and see if this is real. Finally, after 2 years, I dug through the mess of UFO evidences I have here, and I found the original negative, and it's not on the negative. It was just stuff on the picture that shouldn't have been there if they'd had a clean negative. So we can forget that. But I wonder, I would like to share very briefly here, 14 years after the Socorro event, I had received an alert from a scientist at White Sands about UFO activity out there, and we saddled up our mobile UFO tracking lab. We headed out, and I don't want to get into what happened when we got to White Sands, where he asked us to come, but one day we were in Phoenix some days later, and I'd like to just describe the fact that in broad daylight, I and Robert Dunham and my former wife, Kitty Bo, now my present wife of 34 years, but we were driving north of Phoenix, and we had a mobile lab. The back doors, unfortunately, had been locked on the Silverado vehicle, and they were supposed to have been unlocked. Believe it or not, off to the right of the highway going north from Phoenix, the interstate, in an area that was thick with shoya cactus, which you don't want to run into, and it wasn't greasewood bushes like it's Socorro, but there was a ravine over there, and believe it or not, we all three saw an object shaped exactly like the Socorro object, in broad daylight, within a few hundred feet, take off out of the ravine. Now, there was a difference. We didn't see a blue column of bright light or hear a roaring sound from it, but it went off vertically. But the difference was remarkable. The surface of this thing was so black that if you were to hit it with a bright light, you'd have to hit it probably at a narrow oblique angle to even see any reflection off of it, because it's like it absorbed all the light. This thing took off vertically like it's Socorro, shaped exactly like it, and I'd say it was the same size. And it took off and made a turn to the west across the highway. When it got in front of a big thunderhead, was up in the direction of Prescott, a white cloud, something remarkable happened. Around this black object, which was not, its body was not oriented in the direction of travel, but off several degrees of the direction of travel. Out the forward end, there looked like a spinning, glowing blue, let's call it a cobweb, or like you had a caterpillar inside weaving a cocoon. And this thing just spiraled around it from front to back and covered it with a blue-white glow, which made it harder to see against the sky. And we were battling to get the keys and get the back doors open and take pictures. We didn't get time. We didn't get good pictures until later in the day. But I just wanted people to know that the three of us, my former wife and Robert Dunham and I, saw in broad daylight at within a few hundred feet something that really looked like the Socorro object, except for the color change. And Ben had mentioned earlier the possibility they can affect the surface appearance of these things. Well, this thing sure looked like the Socorro object, but it was black. So I'm going to leave it at that, unless Ben or somebody wants to ask me a question about this or make a comment. Otherwise, I'll get out of your hair.
Do you have anything to ask Ray while you have him, or?
Ray, I actually mentioned your encounter in the book. I didn't go into detail because of the fact that if I included everything I wanted to include, it would have probably bankrolled me. But I did include the fact that you had witnessed these events, and trying to get interest in people asking a question to find out what actually happened, because that's a whole nother story unto itself. It just verifies the fact that there were unusual objects in this area for a long time. I mean, Ray's encounter with these objects, which he told us in detail, are incredible. And so it just goes along the line that in this area of the United States, a lot of unusual things happen around military bases we have, not probably coincidentally, but the fact that Ray has further documentation to support unusual aerial phenomena in this area, regardless of the time frame, is very important.
Let me mention one thing, if I may, just and close with this. This event that we saw was 14 years and, let's see, April, May, June, July, and 4 months approximately after the Socorro event. But the fact that here was a thing that looked exactly like the Socorro object except for the color, which it changed color, really makes me feel that we're looking at something persistent across time. And I want people to keep in mind that if this were a secret craft, as some people were alleging, in all these years, 50, however many years since Socorro, we would have learned about it. It wouldn't have been kept secret that long. We not only didn't have then, but we do not have now something that can behave as a Socorro object. So I'm going to get out of here and let your guest get back talking whatever they'd like to. And thanks for listening, folks.
Thanks.
All right. Hey, Ray. Thanks for the call, Ray. Thanks. So the line's open. That number again is 855-472-5483. And Bill will take your calls in over there. And yeah, well, I was glad Ray called in. Actually, that's where I met you, Tony, you and Ben for the first time. Is that Ray's house?
I saw you up in Ray's, well, I won't say his attic, his third floor up there, or was it second floor? I can't remember.
It was like 900 degrees.
It was really warm.
Yeah. 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 What a great source of files and things. Amazing stuff in that house.
Oh yeah, it's tremendous. Yeah. It's every time we go there, it's like Pandora's box.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. So as far as this case, what are some of the other? There's Ben. He's back.
Sorry.
What are some of the other things you have, discovered that's not been talked about before? I know you talked about the woman that saw this in the Albuquerque River or whatever that was, canal. But are there some other things you've uncovered? Because I know you said you dug through newspaper clippings, and you were in the area 4 times, and interviews. Did you get to interview more people than I know you mentioned that one person?
Yeah, we got to a gentleman that had run into Lonnie. I think we talked about the radiation, but we also had a gentleman, Patrick Richard, who had moved to the area. He was an archaeologist, sorry. And he had moved to Socorro, and he was also an artist. And if you go to the local, where the police station used to be located, which is now the museum, there's a portrait of Lonnie that Patrick Richard did. And so I met him through the internet as we were talking about this story. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly how we actually interacted, but it turns out he's the person that had drawn the portrait for Lonnie that hangs in the old police station. He had moved to Socorro, and he met with Lonnie several times. And in my longest chapter, which is about the Socorro symbol that Tony and I investigated in great detail, simply because it was not important to get the symbol right, but to understand the whole process of why it's so complicated. Patrick had a great story about that. So he had met Lonnie several times and had told Lonnie he was doing a portrait, and Lonnie would always turn down breakfast, but would always accept coffee, which I'm kind of the same way. I always want to eat, but I'll never turn down coffee. I should be on Seinfeld's Comedians Getting Coffee. But anyway, make a long story short, he met with Lonnie several times. And on one of the occasions he was there, he drew the fake symbol and the real symbol on a napkin and presented it to Lonnie. And Lonnie kind of offhandedly looked away and pointed to what he said was the correct symbol, which was not the fake symbol that's promoted to this day. So that's another example of just running into somebody. And he turned me on to Gordy Hicks. And Gordy Hicks, when Tony and I investigated, turns out his mom was a documented, had a degree in photography. And Gordy Hicks was on the board at Socorro at the time. He was a kid. But his mom had been grabbed by apparently the FBI and taken to the site and taken all these photographs, like probably 300 or 400 photographs from every angle imaginable. And then when I talked to Gordy recently for the book, he said like they didn't tell me where they're from, but they all had suits on. That's FBI or CIA, one or the other. It doesn't really matter. They're both working with each other. So they knew that his mom was one of the few women in the world that actually had a degree in photography. Plus, she had her own development studio at her house. So once the photographs were taken, they all followed her to her house, developed these photographs, and not a single one of them has seen the light of day since then.
Wow.
But it was a great story because I talked to Gordy personally, and he's on the board now. He's a well-respected person in Socorro, New Mexico. And the one thing I want to definitely point out was Tony and I visited Socorro. Great people, great city, incredibly friendly, very nice. As I was told many times, people have lived there almost all their lives. The only people left were the transient students that came in and came out with degrees. But most people that grew up there liked it so much they stayed there. So a lot of the people that were there during the incident recorded their incidents with us during Lonnie Zamora's UFO encounter. So it's just one of those things where you can actually, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode where you go back in time to see your childhood. You can actually visit Socorro and kind of get a glimpse of what it was like, 40, 50, 60 years ago.
If you do visit, eat at Bodega Steakhouse.
Yeah,
you found a good place to eat. That's good. What about the physical evidence of this case? You had the burnt creosote or whatever you just called them earlier, bushes. But there was that scrape on the rock. Do you think that when people got there earlier that they may have taken some more?
I don't think so. In fact, it was Ray Stanford who noticed the most important piece of evidence, which was a rock that was had shavings of metal from the foot of this craft on the rock itself, and he was able to get this rock. Unfortunately, the biggest piece of metal had fallen off during transit, getting it to Goddard, where I'm sure Ben will mention this in a few minutes here, where Dr. Frankel was one of the key people involved in investigating this strange metal and getting it analyzed.
Yeah, Ray told me that story personally. It's really disheartening, but go ahead. Let's hear it.
Actually, Lonnie had
Lonnie identified
it. Yeah, it went over to, there were 4 landing impressions from the 4 landing gear, and Lonnie had noticed the rock was broken. They all walked over, and Ray, being, Ray is very sharp. Even at his age now, he hasn't lost a step, but he looked down and noticed that there was a rock that was broken by one of the landing struts that had apparently scraped down it and left some material in it. And so when Lonnie pointed it out and he and Dr. Hynek were standing there, Ray realized that nobody was going to do anything. So he goes, Dr. Hynek, it's time to get back to the police station for the interview with the government. They want to talk to you. So they all piled into the car, went back to the police station, and Ray got back in his car, drove back to the site, and grabbed the rock. And that's a whole nother story. I detail it in great detail in the book about the metal. It's one of those stories where you give metal to a scientific community. If it's what you hope it is, it becomes classified. You'll never see it again, and the story turns out badly. And that's what's happened with the metal from the rock that was hit by the strut. The few things that we know was it was probably an zinc iron alloy that was combined in such a way that it didn't conform to any charts on Earth, but it was also non-corrosive. So I think the gist of it was if this was painted on the outside of a strut, it wouldn't corrode due to anything, kind of like gold. Nothing affects gold. And so it would be an excellent coating for a strut landing on a rugged surface. And it seems like this craft was designed to land on a rugged surface. It reminds me of the craft we send to comets and moving objects that we try to land on. They have to have these kind of claws that gripped it and hang on. And the one thing about this craft was it landed at an angle according to all the details we have. And so it seemed to have like the 4 gear that were landed were ready to grab a surface because they probably weren't sure what they were landing on.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting. You know, the whole story, Ray's book just set the standard for so many paths to follow to figure out what happened. And a lot of them ended dead ends, which is what happens when the government gets involved.
Yeah. Now, did he ever notice when this thing lifted up, did the landing gear stay stationary?
I believe it retracted because as it raised up.
It never came out. I mean, when I went through in great detail all the reports that Lonnie made, and never did he say he saw it retract.
You just have to assume.
It just at one point he saw the craft leaving and he didn't notice the struts anymore. Because in a lot of the documentary, he says he saw 2 landing gear. Well, obviously he couldn't see the other side of the craft. So he was being honest. He saw 2 because he was facing the craft at a certain angle, but there were 2 on the other side. And so he just wasn't paying attention. I mean, the fact that the roar went off, he hit the ground, his Army training, he thought that it was going to blow up. I mean, everything it makes sense. You would do the same thing unless you weren't trained and you just stand there with your mouth open, looking, kind of drooling on yourself, going, what the hell? But Lonnie hit the ground, his head turned away from the object as he was trained, and it took off. And so it's just one of those things where with the one witness to the actual event itself, you have to pretty much go by his blow-by-blow description of what happened. And I think it was pretty accurate.
Yeah, one of the things that's a little puzzling too, and I never really understood it, maybe you can clear it up, is at first the 2 beings seemed startled that they see him or you know, and then next thing you know, he says he doesn't see them anymore, like they got up in the craft. But he didn't consistently watch them and see what they were doing and like crawl up a ladder or anything like that.
The terrain there was really rough where Lonnie's car was situated. In order for him to continue moving towards where the craft was landed, he had to be very careful with his car because today, as many times as cars have driven on this dirt road, if you will, it's really rough. So back then, before many cars at all were there, I'm sure it was even a brand new car. It was probably even rougher. And our first trip there, Ben was standing. He had his foot on a cactus, and he didn't even know it. Pulls his foot off, and there's sure enough, there's cactus needles stuck in there. So, you know, his tires and the sharp rocks and all these things. By the time he got to that craft, he probably looked back up again. Is what I imagine. He started collecting information again.
Yeah, here's the dichotomy that you know. A lot of our research is based off of what Ray said, but I have to be open to the opportunity to listen to other people. And when Mike Moore, the physical scientist who Lonnie ran into in a gift store and took to the site because he was concerned about radiation because he saw the badge that Michael Moore had. And I checked out Michael. He was a physical scientist, radiation, New Mexico Tech University. So Lonnie took him to the site, and the description that I have in the book sounds like Lonnie said, look, I didn't tell anybody, but I drove a lot further and saw a lot more of the creatures before I decided to get out of the car. And that is in itself tells me that if true, and it's only a story, but if true, would explain Lonnie's fright because he probably got to the point where he realized he wasn't looking at humans anymore. It was something entirely different. But the fact that he took Michael Moore, a PhD radiation scientist, to the site and said, here's where I was. I didn't tell people I was standing here. Here's where they were located. Was there the possibility I got cancer from this? And as I detail in the book, you know, Michael says, look, the symptoms you would have had would have showed up by now. I'm pretty sure he didn't get radiation, but he details the encounter. And for the fact that Lonnie took him to the site and told him where he was and oriented the car and everything is just tells you that it was like very close to before Lonnie passed away, unfortunately, that Lonnie was still concerned about cancer. And I'm not to this day sure of what Lonnie died of, but indications were it wasn't related to this incident, but he was still concerned that he got radiated. And that is just the actions of somebody that still knew what happened to him and wasn't making up a story.
Wow, interesting. Well, we're right near the end of our show here. So again, why don't you throw out, well, first of all, the title, it's like a very long title, the title of the book.
The title, you know, I actually have to look at it to remember it, because it was actually,
I believe it.
It was Ray helped me with the title, because I had Not of This Earth, but the title is Not of This World. This 1964 Socorro UFO with Humanoids, witness, policeman, Lonnie Zamora. And the reason for all that is I didn't digitize it, because all my friends that have written books that went digital got ripped off. Ray got ripped off in multiple languages. I have all the keywords for a search, but the only way you can get to the book is you got to contact me. So if you want to reach out to me on Facebook or get the book, I'll certainly send it to you. It's just a way to protect the integrity of the knowledge and not have it show up in, you know, multiple countries under some ridiculous name. Because Ray has in detail told us how badly he got ripped off, and I feel horrible for what happened to him, because I think it sold hundreds of thousands of copies in other countries, whereas he printed 15,000 copies of that book. So, you know, we learned a lot. The good and the bad from Ray was how to do things right, how to protect yourself.
Yeah, right. Well, excellent, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight. It was a real pleasure to see you two again.
Thanks, guys.
Good talking
Appreciate
to you.
it. It's COVID haircut.
Yeah, you got to get a haircut sooner or later. All right, you guys take care.
All right, thanks, Sam.
All right, yeah, bye. All right, everyone. So that is it for our show this evening. And next week, we will be back with Tom Reed. He's going to be talking more. We had Tom Warner on a while back. Tom Reed was talking about the, what's called now the Berkshire's UFOs, the episode on Netflix on the Unsolved Mysteries, episode 5. Great one if you haven't watched it yet. So he's going to be talking about his experience, and he has been talking about this all along. I had actually talked with Tom Reed before. I had no idea there were other witnesses. So anyway, he'll be on next week. So remember to go check out our website, podcastufo.com, and our Facebook page. And thanks again, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.